In the meantime, we are glad to welcome everyone from a bit all over the world in this webinar today, and hopefully for future webinars as well. Today we have a presentation by Professor Hugo Pinto on socioeconomic crisis, regional resilience, and the pandemic. And in particular, the case of Portugal. Um, Before introducing our speaker, though, I would like to inform you that this meeting is being recorded, and which means that both you and your colleagues have the opportunity to follow the meeting at a later stage. This recording will be made available on our YouTube channel, which is EPRC Strathclyde, and shared with you by email. We would also like to encourage you to use Twitter just to share your thoughts on the webinar. And regarding the Zoom functions, I'm sure you're all familiar with the protocol by now with the year into the pandemic, but I won't go into too much detail, but just a reminder to please keep your microphone on mute if you're not speaking. Also use the Zoom raise a hand function if you'd like to make an intervention, or you can also feel free to use the chat function to send questions or comments, since after the presentation we will have a Q&A. And to present our speaker today, Hugo Pinto is an economist. He has a PhD in governance, knowledge, and innovation, and is a permanent researcher at the Center for Social Studies of the University of Coimbra in Portugal. He's also currently a coordinator of NICEJ, which is a research group on economy, science, and society. He is a member of the Observatory on Crisis and Alternatives and responsible for the Atlantic Social Innovation Observatory. He is also an invited assistant professor at the Faculty of Economics at the University of Algarve. And he was involved in the design and evaluation of several innovation policies and instruments, recently with a focus on smart specialization. Recent books of his include Resilience, Crisis, and Innovation Dynamics from Edward Elgar Publishing, or Resilience and Regional Dynamics from Springer. I will thus give the floor to Professor Hugo so that he can share his presentation. And welcome.
Hello, thank you, Liliana, for the invitation. Thank you for the European Policies Research Center for having me here for this seminar. I'm very happy to be here. This is a topic that is very relevant for me. The justification is not so happy because the pandemic, of course, is a huge problem, but at least it generates for the researchers that are studying this matter a variety of opportunities to understand better the processes of solving the crisis. So my discussion today will be focusing a little bit about this discussion, the regional resilience, the pandemic, trying to provide some information about the Portuguese case. The structure of my presentation. I will talk a little bit about the pandemic, just to emphasize some keynotes that I want to stress. I will try to also present my thoughts on resilience, nothing really special or different from what is already stabilized in the literature. I will then present the Portuguese case study that is based in a project that I'm working with many colleagues in Portugal that now is assessing the different territorial capacities of the territory to respond to the pandemic. In fact, it was a project that has begun before the crisis, so the pandemic and was only an opportunity to understand better some issues that we are already studying. And then I will talk a little bit about transformation. I will emphasize, well, some of my personal thoughts about this, and then some conclusions, not only conclusions of the necessarily of what I have been talking about, but maybe to open the discussion to the audience. So, launching the debate. Everyone has a plan until they have been it. So this is a famous quote by Joe Louis, a good boxer, and that is probably what we also feel with the shock that we are now facing with the pandemic. some figures about the pandemic. First key issue that I want to underline is that the pandemic is an health problem. This is not, of course, the focus of my seminar, but it's important to stress that economic problems are crucial. But for me, the first dimension that we need to address is the health problem. This is important to make this statement, I believe, because many people are putting the economy in front of health needs. So the death toll is not stopping. This is the data from today. So I was getting the data from the most relevant and the recent sources. So you see that we have waves, and the pandemic is not uh, decreasing. In fact, maybe it's accelerating. You see that these are global numbers. In some cases, like in Portugal, it seems like we are now in a good moment. With yesterday, we had the first day in many months with 0 deaths, what was fantastic, of course. But in many countries, you see that is exploding, and probably in the last week, you see with big preoccupation, for example, the case of India. So you see that the problem is not solved. Many cases, many deaths, and this is something that we need to take into consideration. Of course, the health problem is transferred to the economic domain, and that is what I'm going to talk more here today, and has impacts all over the world. So the first, I have here inserted two graphs just to highlight two key messages. One is the percentage of economies that are in recession today. You see here in this left figure, almost, a huge percentage, almost more than 90% of economies in the world are in the recession. What gives the magnitude of the global crisis that we are facing. Nevertheless, it's important to stress that the crisis is being global, but is not felt exactly the same way everywhere. So vulnerabilities and resilience are different, and many countries have impacts that are very deep, and others that where the impacts are not felt in the same way. So there is some regional variance, regional differentiation that we should also take into consideration when we are saying things like we are all in the same boat, and similar expressions that were used mainly in the first moments of the pandemic. For example, if you also consider only the industrial production, here is an index, also the recent data. I'm here comparing Portugal with the UK, just because of audience interests, but the figures are more or less similar to all the countries. A huge decrease to around 70% of industrial production with the impact of the pandemic. So the figures of Portugal and UK are completely is exactly the same. They are exactly in the same spot. This shows that the industrial sector also was affected a lot. Another sector that I'm not going to talk much here, but in the end it will be important for my narrative, is the tourism sector. So I don't have here figures. It was not so relevant for me at this point. But we know that, of course, if tourism is based in two sectors, accommodation and transportation, the borders were closed. People were not trustful to make trips for of any kind. Often it was not permitted. So, of course, tourism was heavily affected. Is with no surprise that many countries and regions that depend on the tourism sector and the services associated with tourism had huge impacts. We will come back to this issue a little bit in the next slides. So about the pandemic, okay, I'm going fast because we don't have much time. We prefer to discuss it with the audience. Resilience. So resilience, I want to underline three issues. One is the the fact that resilience is a characteristic of the complex adaptive systems. This is relevant for me just to underline a particular issue, is that of course the regional resilience, the resilience of a specific territory is not independent of macro kinds of resilience. For example, the resilience of the country or the resilience of the Eurozone, and is not also independent from the resilience of lower levels, for example, communities or even the people. The linkages between the different levels, you know that, of course, research is still making a way in linking the different types of resilience. But for sure, there exists a very relevant connection. Another issue is the dynamic character of resilience. What you see as resilience in a specific moment can be not exactly resilience. Is the case when, well, we were talking about Joe Louis. If you see this many times in the ring, a boxer gets a punch and goes to the floor and he gets up very quickly, but he trembles and he falls down again. So the fact that he was very quick to get up is not a sign of resilience. Resilience is a more complex phenomenon. It's not just getting up very quickly, it has other things. Here, when I'm talking about regional resilience, I'm not thinking about groups of countries that can have a regional dimension. I'm talking about the subnational character. So regional resilience is regarding administrative regions or municipalities or localities. I'm talking about that. So just for the conceptual precision. So here, some common thoughts about the resilience. The traditional two visions, the resilience has resistance, getting the punch, and smiling and not trembling. Ha ha ha, I'm so strong, I don't get any problem in getting a punch. That is resistance. Another one is recovery, getting the punch, maybe going to the carpet, but coming up again. And these are the traditional visions of resilience. This is what usually the literature is thinking when it's is talking about bouncing back, coming back to normality. But there are other types of resilience, and probably now it's important to think about these types. Very associated with the evolutionary economic geography, the vision of adaptation, and adaptability. That this vision is relevant to create new capacities. Usually is associated with what already exists in the structure. And another perspective is the vision of the renewal of the system. Let's say the complete transformation about strategy and the capabilities of the system. These two types of resilience that I was here referring are particularly important if we don't want to go back to normal. Often normal is the problem. So we want transformation, we want change, and we need to change to do that. So often we need to think about how to adapt, how to renew, and that is about transformation. I have put it here a graph that shows the relevance of thinking about transformation. A recent paper, the European Commission technical paper from Giovanni and others that connects the duration of the disturbance and the intensity of the disturbance. Of course, when you have low intensities and the disturbance takes not so much time, you can absorb it, you can adapt it. But if it's a disruption that is very intense and takes much time, like is the case that we are seeing here, we are living, well, I didn't expect this. In fact, 1 year ago, I never expect to be still in confinement. But anyway, if it's too long, you need to understand how to transform the system. That is a key message. We need to our policies, our specific research to go in this direction, the transformation of the system, because obviously something is not well with many economies and with the global economy as a whole. I will now emphasize the Portuguese case that probably is what brings many of the participants to here. So some thoughts. This is what I'm going to show you is is a practical example. We defined an approach, and I'm going to share with you our approach, and then we try to analyze it based in some with some for comparison. So our vision here is that it starts from a theoretical suggestion that is vulnerabilities and resilience are two facets of the same coin. So usually resilience is also a, a, an answer, a response to vulnerabilities that exist in the system. Here, for practical reasons, they are also theoretically anchored, but for practical reasons, we divide vulnerability in two main domains. One is susceptibility, another is exposure. This vision was inspired by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that where many of these things are well defined. So we brought these concepts for the study of the economy. So we divide the structural susceptibility. We understood it has the structural characteristics that weaken the system in the face of adverse events. And in this case, we selected 5 variables: unemployment, income, inequality, micro firms, and precarity, and exposure. So exposure regards systems that lack protection from risks originating from outside. Here we selected dependence on tourism, dependence on fragile exporting sectors, dependence on real estate. Resilience, we measured with the variation of registered unemployment in the Institute of Employment and the professional training. That is the official organization in Portugal that deals with the unemployed. I want to stress some things about the data. The data we were very, let's say, very ambitious with the data. So this data is the most we left some variables because we didn't have the quality of the data. This data is exactly the reality, the data that we were working. So the problem in this case is not the data, because we were focusing all the information about all the establishments of the real employment. So that is very deep. Of course, when you are talking about, for example, registered unemployment, you need to understand that data always have problems, because, for example, some sectors unemployment is not registered. Imagine creative and cultural industries or artists. They don't go to this center to get registered. They only suffer the impacts of the shock. And for example, that was why the Portuguese government created a specific tool to support artists during this pandemic crisis. So many activities don't go many professions don't go to the unemployment services. But well, this is the most updated information that we have, because it's updated monthly, and it's the way it is, even if we know that many sectors don't go to the official data. So for the analysis that we have done, this was an exploratory study, so we have done many things to try to look for results. In general, the results were consistent with one with another. We performed the cluster analysis with all the variables, with using principal component analysis, specific variables for susceptibility and exposure. And well, for presenting, I have retained this last version, a cluster for susceptibility, another for exposure, and then I will show you the data. Well, the clustering follows a process. It's here explained. The PowerPoint will then be available. Everything was done using the SPSS, and then we also made some posterior analysis to confirm that the clusters were different. Maps that are usually what geographers want to see. So this here, what you see is first I need to make a cautionary note. Of course, the situation is very dramatic everywhere. So this is only this is the relative chaos. This means that the places that are darker is where the problems are higher. That doesn't mean that the other areas are good. This means that they are less susceptible or less exposed. That's what it means. So I will come back to these figures in some moments, but what you can see from a quick analysis is that regarding susceptibility, there are three areas where it is concentrated: the north, the area of Lisbon. Let me check here. The area of Lisbon, and here the area of the Algarve, and exposure again the north of the country, and again the Algarve. Some municipalities in the south of Portugal. So here this is more relevant for you that are interested in this research to follow. We have crossed the susceptibility and exposure clusters with the different regions in Portugal. There are some regions that concentrate more some particular clusters, and we also cross the susceptibility and the exposure clusters for you to see that, well, there are also some overlapping between the clusters, especially the fourth cluster, that is the cluster in weakest situation. But now I will give some detail on this. So the second phase after identifying usually is naming the clusters. So, and I recovered the original data for you to understand. This is a heat map just for you to see where are the biggest problems. So the first cluster in susceptibility we called low unemployment and low inequalities. Well, it was a cluster in a good situation. The only major issue was it was kind of fragile in terms of exportations. The second cluster in susceptibility was low income. The cluster 3 in susceptibility was baptized as high inequality and dominance of micro firms. And the cluster 4 was unemployment and precarity. Here in red, of course, I suppose it was auto explicative, but what is in red is the problematic areas. This is compared with the national average. So if it is, there are some, if it's higher, for example, if inequality it's much higher, it's problematic. In the clusters of exposure, there is this first cluster that follows closely the national trends, the national averages, but then you see a cluster that is associated with the fragile export sectors, another one that is associated with the real estate dependence, and another one that is highly tourist. Well, this is just to try to create some categories for the clusters. If you cross the clusters with the resilience variable that we were suggesting, the variation in the unemployment, you can see here some interesting data. First, just for you to understand, I have here measured 3 moments. One was the variation of official unemployment between February, that was the month before the first case of COVID in Portugal, and the month before the first confinement. So let's say it's the month number 0. And then with February to April, and then February to June, and then February to December. So we measure these three moments in time. So regarding our clusters, what we can see here, and maybe it's my main point here, you also see the map. This is the map for the date in December. You see that, of course, there is a distribution of the growing unemployment, the area of Lisbon, the Algarve, and what you can see here, it's I want to underline a few points. So one of the points is that the unemployment is growing. So let's say that some temporary unemployment, maybe it's being converted to more structural unemployment. So you see increasing the percentage. These are growth rates of the unemployment increased 53%. This is let's say cumulative, but it's preoccupating, of course. This month, Portugal achieved its highest numbers in unemployment in the last 20 years. So that is also relevant to mention. Regarding the regional distribution, you see huge variety, but there are two places where the, let's say, the problems are more concentrated. In Lisbon, 35%, but here, please note the figure, Algarve, more than 700% of growth. This is connected with the problem that we already have identified, the tourism dependence and the real estate is numbers that are huge, and they were also reflected in our clustering. If you select only the municipalities that are highly tourist, you see that the number is even bigger. So more than 1000% of growth of unemployment between February and December. So this should say something. I don't know exactly what it is, but probably say something about tourism dependence and this complex that was being, let's say, the center of many of the policies in Portugal. I don't know if you were aware, but since 2015, with the change of government, when Portugal was leaving, let's say, the implementation of the austerity measures to cope with the previous crisis, the tourism sector was a sector that was highly stimulated by the government. And Portugal suffered a tourism boom that was particularly evident in the cities with the growth of urban tourism. Also in the Algarve, not only with the touristification that was already very intense, but also with the transformation of the cities as tourism destinations. So this is, let's say, in the last years in Portugal, was this touristification of the country that doesn't seem to be, well, the best strategy for coping with these kinds of crises. So probably some transformation is needed. What I'm here advocating, of course, is part of what I have been studying, is that maybe smart specialization is a interesting proposal to induce transformation in the territories. Of course, we have a huge, let's say, international experimentation moment from 2014 to 2020, with many regions implementing these. Some of them were implementing it deeply, others were just, let's say, making the same with these new concepts, but doing exactly the same type of innovation policies. But I believe that if regions use this moment to adapt their own smart specializations, because it's compulsory, it's again a crucial tool for the implementation of European structural funds until the rest of the programming period. Probably it's going to be good. Smart specialization is focused in the transformation of the region, in the characteristics that our specific region can have and can excel compared to others, and is based also in the will of the actors, in shared visions, in shared projects discovered by entrepreneurial discovery processes. So one of my visions is smart specialization may be a useful tool. In Portugal, smart specialization was being implemented. Here is the areas of the country that were defined as priorities. One of the things that I want to underline, these are the priorities from 2014-2020. Many of them refer tourism. So tourism was one of the key areas. And another thing that I want to underline is the lack of selectiveness. Well, to make a strategy, often you need to select some domains. You cannot select all the domains, because selecting all the domains is not selecting. So one of the criticisms that I have to the Portuguese regional strategies and national strategy, because Portugal had two levels, had the national smart specialization and regional smart specialization strategies, is that there was some lack of selectiveness, lack of, let's say, commitment to put some important players outside of this game. So probably this is something that is being corrected now, and tourism, of course, is crucial for the country, but needs to be connected with other sectors in a more effective way to improve, to add value, and to be less exposed to the international and outside of the system impacts. Well, some conclusive notes just for provoking the audience and making some debate. One is I have written this, but many people have said the same. The pandemic is being cruel, and is being like an educator, like a lecturer, like a professor. Is teaching us many things. Well, maybe we will not learn nothing as a society, but probably we should try to understand what the pandemic is saying to us, and maybe use this opportunity to solve many of the systemic problems that our contemporary economy has. For the case of Portugal, I believe it's quite illustrative of many regional imbalances and how many bets, the bets are not only in Portugal, in many countries, especially in the south, the south of Europe, but all over the Europe, urban tourism is a international trend. This emphasis in real estate and tourism is I believe it's problematic. Um, for the future, the post-pandemic, well, we hope that there is a post-pandemic world, because we are all completely tired of the pandemic, but probably it needs to be transformative. This is not a new thing. Green, digital, social. Of course, this is already, let's say, embedded in some way in the recovery and resilience programs that are being constructed everywhere in the different member states, also in Portugal. The strategy will involve choices, and that is important. It means being selective and trying to define a trajectory, try to define a way. That is quite important, because when we select a way, we will leave other possibilities abandoned. And maybe these other possibilities are also relevant, but we'll have to choose. Choosing is part of the options that we have now. So two other great ideas that I want to end with is the importance of the state. This is also not new, but for many time the state was not considered the crucial actor. In fact, the national public systems in many domains, also in health, but also in R&D, were being reduced. And now with the pandemic, we want answers. The citizens from all the countries want answers, and they come to the national governments. They don't go to the to the CEOs of important firms. They don't go ask for NGOs. They go to the prime ministers and to the presidents for responses to the crisis. So I think here is a reemergence of the state, and that the state should not be only, well, a short-term supplier of these responses, probably should be more engaged with the processes of innovation. Uh, this is something that is already being told by many people, but I suppose that here his role in smart specialization, and in particular in the regional smart specializations, is quite crucial. So this is my presentation. I have some information. The project, this is my center in Coimbra, my contacts if you want to send me an email. And I want to, the analytical part was done with the inspiration of João Ferrão, Castro Caldas, Renato Carmo, and Fernando Honório, that were my partners for this research. So thank you, and I'm open to the debate, and I hope that I can clarify any issues that you have.
Thank you, Ugo. That was a very interesting presentation, very thorough as well. I'm very pleased to get to know a bit more about the regional variation of the impact of the crisis in Portugal. I'd like to open the floor to the discussion. If anyone has a question, you feel free to write it in the chat, or also raise your hand. If you turn on your camera, I can see if you raise your hand directly, but if not, you can use the Zoom functions to do it. I would maybe start by opening the chat and breaking the ice by asking a bit more. Ugo, do you know if there are already new approaches in Portugal to tackling the crisis that are not so reliant then on those particular areas like tourism?
Well, well, I think that the government is pushing many different initiatives, and the pandemic, if it created something, was a huge variety of responses from not only the government but the regional authorities and also other actors. So there are many things that are in being implemented right now. One of the I want to stress three dimensions. One is beyond the national government, because that is more or less public. It's quite evident that, for example, the national government has 2 or 3 days ago signed the recovery and resilience plan. That is a plan that has many different measures to support, let's say, the structural change in Portugal. Well, I was a little bit a critic of the plan, because for me it's more like a portfolio of big projects. But anyway, it directs in the right, let's say, the right strategic goals for all these kinds of transitions, mainly the digital and green transition that we need. So at national level, this framework is crucial of the recovery and resilience plan. It's also funny. This is a parenthesis that resilience now is entering the vocabulary of policymakers. So when we begin to study, resilience was a different concept. Now the big plan to answer the problem, it's called resilience and recovery plan. So that is also worth mentioning. But anyway, I was talking about different levels of implementation. The government has these big tools. There are in many the variety of answers is huge, with many programs to support firms, for example, tourism, culture. There are many initiatives from the Portuguese government. In fact, they were kind of active. But at the local level, I want to underline also the role of municipalities. So you see a big variation between especially in the first phases of the pandemic. You saw different responses at local level, and the municipalities were fast to benchmark and to use these good practices. For example, in terms of the organization of the public space, in terms of trying to support some areas of economic activity. For example, what examples? Uh, um, Restaurants, the support for paying the transportation of food from restaurants to the people that were confined. Many municipalities have supported these expenses. For example, paying taxis to deliver this was something that happened here in the Algarve and in some municipalities. So this is kind of, let's say, localized initiatives. Also, the universities, I think they were universities and other higher education institutions were very fast in answering demands from the resulting from the pandemic. Not only for more structural thinking, presenting some ideas and plans, but also for things that are crucial for the daily routine. For example, now everybody in the universities are being tested to return to the presential system, and the tests are done by staff of the universities, the professors and the students. So this is a thing. For example, the university also created some universities created systems to stimulate the testing, especially in the very early moments of the crisis. That was now everything is more or less organized, but in March the things were not like that, and the universities were key actors in providing the, let's say, a qualified answer to these needs, the needs of testing. That was something that was not put in motion in that period. So there is a variety of things that are happening, and the issue here is that one of my thoughts, it's that hopefully many of this learning can be uh, integrated, institutionalized, if you prefer. Because what I feel is that many of the things that we were learning, and I think that at least the first phase of the pandemic was so, the expectations were high regarding, let's say, the improvement of human beings. We are going to learn from this very sad moment. I think we are losing that, and probably we are not learning nothing from the pandemic, and we will lose the pandemic in economic terms worse, but we also will not learn anything. So that is the biggest problem for me, the incapacity of us to collectively learn from this very disruptive event.
Thank you. I also noticed that we have some Portuguese names in the audience. Maybe they would have something to add in regarding to their work on their region. But also those that are not Portuguese and that are joining us, maybe they would like to give some comments about how it is like in their regions or regarding their work. If Oh, I see there's a comment in the chat by Samuel. Namely, I will just say it out loud. Samuel, if you would like to also unmute, feel free to do so. But yes, the comment says border regions tend to behave differently from other areas due to usually being sometimes marginalized and with border opportunities linkages. I wondered if you found any unique border region effects in the East and North. Any comments on that, Hugo?
I also agree. You see that many regions that are bordering suffer different kinds of processes. So, well, in Portugal, Portugal is a small country, and many regions are bordering regions with different characteristics. For example, here in the Algarve, we have Vila Real that is separated by a river from the side of Spain, but we know that there is a big commuting between the both cities, Ayamonte from one side and Vila Real. And for example, when it was the lockdown, it was strange because people had difficulties in traveling and all these things that are families that are separated from borders. The pandemic creates all these sorts of effects, and of course this reflects in the economy because one of the things that I believe it could be also relevant to learn a little bit is the importance of localized productive chains. So we depend too much in very long local chains. So from products that are coming from very far away, and when borders are closed, they don't arrive. So that is a thing that is relevant. Bordering regions suffer these effects, I suppose, with more intensity because they depend a lot in different kinds of services, not only from their country, but also from the other country. For example, people from the south of Spain use often um, the airport in Faro because it's closer than the one in Sevilla, and the Sevilla to enter from this side to Sevilla, you have to go for a circular road that has many traffic, and it take too much hours to enter the city. So it's quite common to have a big quantity of people using the airport. So if the borders are closed, you have more difficulty to come. Of course, that is the evident things because you always have a huge commuting. For example, here in the Algarve, but in the rest of the country, it's quite common people to travel in the weekends or in both ways, Spanish to Portugal and Portugal to Spain. And with the pandemic, that has a major impact in the local economies. If you are thinking about economies that are already, let's say, pressured by the current processes of development, because as you know, the development in Portugal is mainly coastal. The north from the Porto to Setúbal, that is the coastal line, it agglomerates around 2/3 of about 4/5 of the GDP of the country. So the economic activity is concentrated in the littoral in Portugal, in the coastal area. If you think that these bordering regions in Portugal are from the rural side and they depend a lot in this commuting with Spanish, you will understand that these effects were also deep, but maybe they are not so visible in the statistics. So because many of the dimensions are informal ones, so this is also also relevant to think. There is a huge dimension of the informal economy that is not captured by statistics, and maybe it's absent from our policy making.
That's definitely maybe avenues for future work as well. We have a comment from Anastasios in the chat. He is wondering if the method and lessons could be transferred not only to different regions, but different recessions as well. For example, the pandemic is very different to the 2008 crisis, and the next one will likely be different as well. Any comments on that?
Well, I have two comments. One, for sure, the pandemic is quite different. The pandemic crisis is completely different from others, from the origin to the impacts, for the transversal kinds of impacts. But some of the tools that we are using to study crisis may be adapted. I believe that, for example, the framework that we developed, I believe it's not so original like that, even if you made the effort, can be easily adapted to other regions to provide a better comparison of Portugal with other regions from Europe. In my personal case, I have been interested in studying the crisis and the alternatives, exactly because I was studying the previous crisis in 2007, 2008. But I think that much can be learned from the past. At least a couple of things. One of them is that I believe that austerity measures were implemented in a particular phase in the response to the crisis, and they were not so successful. I believe that soon we will begin to talk about the need to control the public deficits again, because they are, of course, they are exploding. And then austerity measures will appear again as a solution. And I think they are not the best solution. So that is one of my learning from the past crisis. Of course, in 2015, even the IMF sent a report saying that, well, austerity measures was not so good. Now everybody is agreeing on that. But when the next crisis needs to be solved in terms of their financial issues, austerity measures will appear again as a solution. So what can we do? Can we grow more? Yes, we can grow more, but it's difficult. Probably what many economists are suggesting is trying to control the inflation and reduce a little bit the debt with inflation. So that maybe it's a monetary policy that can be recovered from the European Central Bank to accommodate a little bit the problems that we are facing now, because the debt, of course, will increase a lot. So I don't have a clear vision, but I have of the solutions. I think we need to study what are going to be the solutions. As economists, those that are economists need to study what are the solutions that we will have to put in practice when the debt of especially the public debts go to well, they are already going. So when we need to solve that issue, we need to study that. But in my view, what we should take into consideration is that austerity measures that didn't work in the last time, I don't see any reason for them to be more successful this one. Another issue that I want also to think it's relevant is at European level, it's the solidarity. So if we are a political space with common citizens, we need to understand what is intra-regional solidarity and international solidarity. And this is something that is being a little bit forgotten. And when crisis arrives, we only matter, well, we have dozens of years of individualization, but that's another discussion. But we only matter about our own situation. So we need to reintroduce this discussion of solidarity in our let's say policy agendas.
It's especially an interesting point since well, pandemic knows no borders, right? So yes, it's definitely something to tackle. And I wondered regarding the smart specialization strategies, how do you think they could best help then to towards this transformation? You mentioned them, but if you could
Yeah.
maybe expand that a bit more.
Yes, I was waiting for that question. Well, smart specialization strategies are, let's say, compulsory requirement for assessing funds. So everybody is doing smart specialization strategies. The issue is, are we going to make strategies for respond to the compulsory uh, obligation to the EU, or are we going to make smart specialization strategies that may introduce change in the territory? So that is the goal. So my ideas about this is that first is deepening the participatory governance in the regions. Many regions, and I was involved in some expert groups in the Commission about smart specialization, the problem is quite transversal. Smart specialization was not implemented deeply in the large majority of regions, especially because of the lack of governance systems. The strategies were well written, the priorities were well defined, but then the governance and the participatory systems were not put into practice. So many of the forums of innovation, the platforms with the actors, had few meetings, and the meetings were, let's say, incipient with few results. So one of the things is putting the power in the actors. Of course, this is problematic because the regional authorities want to remain with the power of the decision. So if you put participatory governance in practice, that will have some, it's a tension, it's something that is not it's not easy. Then another crucial issue is to set a good vision of what should be the desirable future in the territory. So the regions need to talk with each other inside and need to clarify with their actors what is the trajectory that they want, and then follow this trajectory. Of course, this is not easy. That this is very selective, but this needs to be done. To go, there is this saying of Seneca, a philosopher, that says the boat that doesn't know where it's going, all the winds are contrary, something like this, in a very fast and very weak translation. But if we don't know where to go, all the problems will be obstacles. So we need to define a strategy, and smart specialization is about that, being selected and defining a route. Uh, and having resources. So smart specialization creates linkages with the resources that are being publicly available. Of course, they are limited in many regions. Let's say the quantity of financing is not so transformational, because for transforming a region, you need lots of funds, but smart specialization funds are not so many. But anyway, they may be, if they are selective enough, if we put the money in the right place, maybe they are transformative. That is the goal. Smart specialization is not only to make innovation, is to make projects that can be transformative, catalysts of the region, structural change. So that's the goal. Of course, you know that smart specialization usually should focus I have suggested this often. It's not so difficult to select priorities, and this usually is a big problem in smart specialization. You need to understand what are the key areas in the region, maybe two, the key emergent areas in the region, and maybe you have to cross with some relevant key enabling technologies, maybe ICT, or for example energy. If you cross these sectors and with the regional characteristics, you will find easily 3, 4, 5 specializations where your region can be very well, let's say, in the global value chains and be different from the others. So that's what I'm recommending. So now what we have is the pandemic. So of course, one of the issues that is going to appear is also the health issues, because we were not well aware of the health issues that can be so, let's say, disruptive of our way of life. We were worried about aging. We were worried about the digital divide. We were worried about social exclusion and inequality, and maybe you need to include in all these dimensions also the dimension of public health that was completely forgotten, and like you were saying, is an international and trans-border problem that we need to include in some way in our thoughts. So I suppose that smart specializations will also reflect these dynamics, and many people are now already thinking about how smart specialization strategies will include uh, tools and responses to the to the to the to solving or coping with this crisis. So there are already some groups that are discussing smart specialization and recovery and these kinds of stuff. So there are already people worried about this.
Yes, and now smart specialization as well is kind of evolving towards a more, how they say, sustainable and even inclusive sort of framework. So that's interesting to see how it evolves as well in this context.
Yes, it is relevant. Just let me just say something.
Yeah.
Relevant not only in that bringing that eco dimension inside of the smart specialization, but it's also interesting to see how smart specialization, that was a very bureaucratic, let's say, tool, is being absorbed by other kinds of actors. For example, I was involved in an experience in Brazil of smart specialization, but if you go to the S3 platform and enter a project that is called Beyond the S3, you will see smart specialization strategies or inspired strategies that are being implemented in many countries, in China, in Australia, in Chile. So this is also interesting how they are absorbing, and of course, smart specialization. We also focus in these cases with the pandemic. So one of the things that I have learned from my experience in Brazil was the participatory dimension and the crucial importance of learning with the other actors. I don't know. Of course, we also do participatory events in in Portugal and in the other countries in Europe that I have participated. But the learning, it was not. At least I felt in this way, was not so deep. Are not so open to learn with others. So that is a thing that we also need to learn. From a very negative point, what I have learned from Brazil is that we should not leave the state to the point where it's in Brazil. So the actors don't trust the state. So we need a state in his various levels that is trustworthy and that we can vet and that we trust the representatives. So in the many interviews that I have done with private firms in Brazil, one of the things that many people said is, we don't trust the state. The state created, let's say, their own systemic failures in terms of innovation. For example, the directionality failure, saying the people to bet in a sector, and then some of after that, the policy disappears. So we don't need that kind of state. We need a strong state in the sense that is trustworthy and listens to the voices of the different kinds of stakeholders in the innovation domain.
Thank you. That's a very good point as well. We already are a bit over at 12 o'clock. So if anyone else has a question, please forward it to Hugo directly, or you can forward it as well to myself, which is, I'll put my email. Oh, sorry. I'll put my email in the chat so you can see. Maybe Hugo, you can do the same as well. And I'd like to thank you all for your presence in today's webinar, and of course to Hugo as well for accepting our invitation. And let me just say that our next webinar at the EPRC will take place on Wednesday, May 12th, when Emil Levenwies will present on place-based application of the well-being agenda, namely the case of Dutch regional policy. And you can register for our mailing list also by emailing me or by keeping your eye out for our updates on Twitter or LinkedIn. And this way you can keep up to date on future events. We hope to see you again. And thank you once again, Hugo, for your presentation today. Thank you, everyone. I
Thank
hope
you
you
all.
have a good
Hope to
day.
see you soon. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.